when we started at Riverwood, my decision was I really want to take people back through the basics because there's going to be a bunch of new people starting, and I wanted everybody to kind of know what finding freedom was about. And so, what finding freedom began as was seeing and saying that addiction is a problem, but if you look at it another way, it was actually seen as the solution to your problems. And so, what were the problems that you were trying to solve with addiction? And so, that's the underlying issues. And that's what we focus on, because what we have found and what we have put into place at Finding Freedom at React Center is unless you start dealing with the underlying issues and getting healthy, your chances of dealing with your addiction successfully are next to zero. And so, a term developed about 5-10 years ago called complex trauma. And it's changed now to be either complex trauma or complex PTSD. And what it simply means, it's not a one-time event trauma. It's a child growing up in an environment of ongoing danger. So they're kind of in trauma or fight-flight mode all the time. The problem when it's with a child is there's sometimes too little to flight, and there's sometimes too little to fight. So they go to a third option we call freeze. So it's the 3 F's of survival mode. And what comes out of that survival mode are 50 different characteristics, 50 different things that happen as a result of a person living, feeling unsafe. And that's what we've been developing over the last 4 weeks. And so tonight we're going to get to number 20. So we still got a little ways to go. But 2 weeks ago, before I was away last week, 2 weeks ago, I started to look at the fact that a person living in danger, it affects their thinking, it affects their emotions. And there's a characteristic of people in complex trauma is I don't want to feel anything, and they try to stuff everything down. But there are 2 emotions that they just don't seem to be able to get a handle on stuffing down. And the one we looked at 2 weeks ago was anger. So there's this deep-seated, bubbling away anger, always there like lava below the surface, and once in a while the volcano erupts. There's a second one, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. And then next week we're going to look at a couple others. But I thought I'd begin by giving you a little graph of the emotional life of 2 different children. So the top line is the emotional life of a child growing up in a healthy family. So on the left you can see a plus sign. That's the positive emotions. The negative is negative or painful emotions. So a child growing up in a healthy family, they do experience some painful emotion. That's just life. But about 80% of their emotional world is happy. It is fairly positive. When you go to a complex trauma child who's growing up in danger, it's a very different picture. 80% of their emotional life is painful, negative emotions. That's why they stuff. That's why they don't like emotions, because they can't fix those 80% negative emotions. They get very few emotions that go into the positive range. And so that is the impact of complex trauma on the emotional world of a child, and it's a very sad thing. So anger was the one negative emotion that's very powerful. The second one, and it is the ruling emotion. It is the emotion that governs everything else, and it is fear. And that's what we're going to develop tonight and next week and the week after that, because it is such a big thing. Now, if I was to ask many clients that would come into a treatment program, do you have fear issues? They would get all puffed up. I don't have any fear. And I would go in my mind, just hang around for a few weeks, buddy, and you're going to have lots of fear that you just denied all your life. And as they get more aware and more honest, what I hear all the time is the admission, I am controlled by fear. And so what that turns into, and we're going to look at tonight, is a whole bunch of different ways that fear shows itself. So the first one is anxiety issues. So about 90% of addicts, complex trauma people, have anxiety issues. And that can come out as ADHD in a child. That can come out as generalized anxiety disorder. PTSD is branded in the anxiety classification. OCD, or obsessive compulsive order, is an anxiety disorder because you believe if I wash my hands so many times, turn the light off so many times, then I'll stay safe. Then nothing bad will happen to me. So the compulsions and the obsessions are all about, I got to do this in order to stay safe. It's an anxiety order. Now just think in broad terms, what causes anxiety? Anxiety occurs in us when we face a dangerous or difficult situation and we don't feel we have the resources or tools to handle it. And we don't have any support to handle it. So it's me with limited resources, limited tools, facing a very difficult situation that is too much for me. Anxiety comes in. Fear comes in. And so a child growing up in complex trauma finds himself in a situation of abuse, neglect, rejection, disrespect, all kinds of problems, no support, no tools given, no way to fix it, and they just go into anxiety. Fear is the constant companion that comes out of the lack of resources. And so the child then comes into teenage life trying to shut all of that off and going to whatever, nothing bothers me. But what they don't realize is deep below the surface, fear is still running the show. And until they get honest about that and face that and learn tools to deal with that, they will continue to be governed and ruled by fear. So I want to give you some of the fears that come out of this deep well of fear that is below the surface. So number one, fear of getting hurt. So when you're living in danger, the constant possibility is you'll get hurt. And so you train the brain to look for things that might hurt you. And in the child's mind is basically all of their life so far has resulted in hurt. Living in danger, getting hurt. Sometimes you see it coming and you can't stop it. Sometimes you're blindsided by it, but you're hurt, and you hate getting hurt. And so you build this wonderful radar system that is looking for danger because of this deep fear of getting hurt again. That then has a cousin, fear of failure. Do you know what happens to a child in a healthy, loving, nurturing home if they fail? They're forgiven. They learn lessons from it. It turns into a growth opportunity, and they come out the better for it. What happens to a child in complex trauma who fails? They get punished for it. They get shamed for it. They get laughed at. And so what a child quickly learns is failure in and of itself hurts because you let people down, you embarrass yourself. But failure never leads to anything good in the mind of a complex trauma child. Failure always leads to more pain, shame, punishment. So failure is to be avoided at all cost. So there's a huge fear of failure. And many of you relate to that. And that goes to the next fear, And it comes out of those first two, fear of the unknown. So when you go in a new unknown situation, you go, I don't know if I'm going to know how to handle this. I don't know if I might get blindsided by something that I didn't see coming. And so anything that unknown raises the risk of getting hurt or of failing. And so you have a fear of entering an unknown situation. And then with that, fear of change. So whenever you go through a change, and it could be a change for good, it could be a positive change, but the fear is, I might not know something about this new situation. So you begin to fear change. And then it grows from that. So we have seen that when you come out of complex trauma, you look for danger, then you create danger and expect danger and assume danger. So the next thing goes like this. You fear success. And you say that to a kid in a healthy family, and they go, why would anybody fear success? And I say, ask a complex trauma person, what do you feel when everything's going well? The other shoe's about to drop. Something bad is about to happen. So that leads to the next fear. I'll just sabotage everything good and get the bad over with. And so complex trauma, you now are creating what you're trying to avoid. You don't want to get hurt. You don't want to fail. But as soon as you have success, you're afraid something bad's going to happen. So you create failure. You sabotage it and get it over with, and you hurt yourself. And that becomes a loop for many people out of complex trauma. You get into pain, you say, I hate getting hurt, I hate failure, I'm going to try hard, and you work hard, and you start to succeed, and good things start to happen, and you get, something bad's about to happen, let's sabotage. So you get a good job, you get your kids back, you do well in recovery, you get in a good relationship, let's sabotage it all. And that is the sad part of that fear thing. It grows so that it destroys even what is good. And then there's another type of fear. And that is the fear of ever being a burden or a pain. So what happens in complex trauma to a child when they grow up neglected or abandoned is they always feel that they're a burden. That's why they're neglected. Dad's got more important things than me. If I go to him with my need, he'll go, and he'll give me the impression that I am such an inconvenience. I am such a pain and a burden. And then you get the idea from family, you never go to anybody outside of family. We take care of our own problems. And so you start to believe that. And then you kind of get pumped into you that we are self-sufficient. We don't need anybody. And that's a point of pride that is given within the family. So now you grow up and you go, I can't do all of this, but I can't ask for help. Because people would then see me as a burden and they would reject me and they would see me as weak and needy and a problem and they would not want me around. So I'll suck it up and I'll try to do it on my own, and then you burn out. And that is one of the key things you have to learn in recovery. You can't do it alone. At some point, you got to face this fear and find a couple safe people and take the risk of saying, I'm struggling right now. Would you mind talking with me? And you're always afraid they're going to reject you and judge you and condemn you. And then you're pleasantly surprised when they say, I'd be happy to. And you start to heal, and it's a very important part of growth. Now, the next one ties into the sabotage thing. And I would say, as my experience as an addictions counselor, that this is often a fear that most people aren't aware of or have never had put into words for them. So let me explain it to you. You see a graph there where there's a line going up, and then a line going down, and then back up, and then back down. So it's a child growing up in complex trauma where you don't feel love. There's conditional love. You feel you have to earn love and validation. So you try to be a good kid. You try to be the perfect child. You try to do things to please your parents, to make them proud of you. And so the line goes up. And what's happening as you work hard is mom and dad seem to be okay with what you're doing. So you start to get your hopes up that they'll love you this time, that they'll be proud of you. Then one day dad gets angry. And he tears a strip out of you. He calls you down. He says you're a failure and your hopes crash. So a couple things happen right there. You felt rejection. You felt failure. You felt guilt. But you felt the pain of getting your hopes up and having them crash. All of those are painful. But a child is an amazing, resilient creature. And what they then think in their mind subconsciously, I just have to try harder. If I'm just better, then Dad will love me, I'm sure. So I will bring Dad his coffee in the morning. I will get straight A's on my report card. And you do that, and Dad seems okay, and you start getting your hopes up again. That maybe this time Dad will love me and validate me. And then one day Dad gets angry and calls you down, and your hopes crash. You know what is amazing to me? I've asked many, many clients, when did you stop hoping? Or when did you lose hope that your dad would love you or validate you? They kept trying and failing. Most people, they all ended between 10 and 13. And maybe you relate to that. But it's like a switch got flipped somewhere in there where you said, don't ever get your hopes up again because you'll always be disappointed. And you learn to squash hope. It took a lot to knock it out of you, but eventually it got knocked out of you. Now you come into recovery, and you work hard, and you make progress, and you start to get your hopes up that maybe I can lick this addiction, and then you relapse, and your hopes crash. And you go, this feels familiar. And you go, I just got to try harder. And you try harder, and you make success. You get a month, 2 months. You start getting your hopes up. Then you relapse. After a while, you relapse. And then you consider getting clean and sober again. And you start to work at it. And you start to get a month. And then you go, you know what? Don't get your hopes up. I know how this is going to play out. It hurts too much to get your hopes up and have them crash. So let's sabotage our recovery. And that, for many people, happens at a subconscious level. But it's the fear of getting your hopes up again to have them dashed again. And so part of recovery that is very hard is daring to hope again. Daring to risk getting my hopes up. I got to do the work. There's not a magic fix. But if I keep fearing getting my hopes up, I will sabotage and never get it. And that can happen in your job. That can happen in a relationship. But this loss of hope, fear of getting your hopes up, is a huge issue for many people in recovery. Now, I said the next 2 weeks I'm going to cover some really big, deep fears, but I just want to give you quickly other fears that come out of complex trauma. Many of you might have these. You can tick them off if it just helps you understand how much fear affects you as a person today. So very quickly, many people fear constantly what other people think of them. Others fear being trapped in a room or a place without exits. I suspect some of you, when you go into a room, you sit in the back corner with your back to the wall so you can watch and have everything in front of you, or you sit in a place where you have an exit if you need it. Many people, when they go to bed at night, they can't sleep with their back to the door. They always have to face the door when they sleep. Some can't sleep without a light on. Some can't sleep without a weapon close by of some kind. Fear has that overtaken their life to that degree. Many people with fear live constantly feeling overwhelmed. Just getting out of bed feels too much. Doing the most basic responsibilities feels too much. Some people live in fear of dying constantly. Many live in fear of illness constantly. Some live in fear of passing out in public constantly. Others, a big fear is not being in control, losing control in some way. That's why some have trained themselves never to go into a deep sleep. You're afraid to go into sleep at all, and all your sleep is light sleep because you don't want to lose control. Others, they don't want to go into a deep sleep because then they'd have a dream, and they're afraid of what that dream might be. Many live with a constant gut feeling of impending doom. They don't know why, they can't shake it. It's just there all the time, and it's a huge fear. Others fear embarrassing themselves in public. So if somebody pointed out to you that your zipper was down, you were flying low, you would go out of here and say, I can never go back to finding freedom. I can't face those people again. They're probably all talking about me, and it would just grow in your mind. That's why I'm a bit of a klutz at times, and it lets you know that I can kind of be klutzy, and it's okay. It's possible to be okay with that. Others, there's a constant fear of losing their mind, of going crazy. And mental health problems can just exacerbate that, make it worse in your mind. And then others live in fear of certain thoughts or certain emotions. And that's just hardly touching the surface. But fear can come out in all kinds of different ways. Some have fears around specific things like flying, like spiders, like snakes, like small spaces, claustrophobia. All of that is there. Now, what I want to quickly do is give you some tools for how can you tell when fear is affecting you. So a lot of it happens subconsciously, so you're not even aware of it. So I want you to understand, fear affects you physically, it affects your thinking, it affects you emotionally. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So physical, you can go starting to shake, get twitchy, start to sweat. That's all part of that. Or you get all tense. Then you get a tension headache, or you can feel it in your shoulders, or you grind your teeth or clench your jaw. That's often a fear, anxiety thing. Some people get sharp pains in their body, in weird places. Others get them in their neck, their face, their head. That can happen. Some with fear, you start getting nauseous, or you get diarrhea, or you get irritable bowel stuff happening. Some get dizzy, lightheaded. You see stars. You get a headache. All of those are physical symptoms. And there's more, but you can look into that. Then it affects your thinking. For many people, the first sign that fear is building is they start to get obsessive thoughts. So it's the hamster in the wheel in the cage, around and round and round and round. You can't sleep because your brain won't turn off. That is often a fear thing. So some people call it busy brain or incessant brain chatter. It's hard to focus because you got all these things chirping in your brain about what you should be thinking about. Then others go into worrying, and you start the what if, what if, what if, what if. And then that gets you more worked up all the time. Some even go to a place where they worry that they're worrying so much. And so now you're feeding the worrying, and that happens. Most people, when they have fear, they go to worst case scenario. So something happens, you just go to the worst case scenario in your thinking as if it's going to happen, it's a fact. Others, when they're in fear, they start thought loops of you're a loser, you're so weak, and you beat yourself up. And you play those tapes in your head. And then others, they're thinking, their brain just gets hyper alert, hyper vigilant. And you are just processing constantly. And one of the ways you can tell whether you're in a hypervigilant state is if somebody came up behind you and tapped you on the shoulder. Would you turn around and punch them? What would you do? And that can tell you just the level of fear inside of you. Then other emotions start to come in besides the fear. So fear triggers your thinking, your body, and other emotions. So you can go, when you're in fear, you just get irritable, grouchy, angry, everything bothers you. You have zero patience for anybody because I got to get safe now. Everybody but better do what I want now. And that means you get very controlling, but it's that whole anger, irritability that starts to come up. And that can just get triggered in a nanosecond. And so all of a sudden, you think you're doing well, one thing happens and you lose it. And you just go ballistic. Others, the fear leads to depression. Everything's too difficult. You start to get overwhelmed, and then you go to hopeless. This is too much. I can't do it. Let's quit. Life sucks. I'm a failure. And it feeds depression. And so that's why we say that in complex trauma, 90% of the people live with anxiety and depression because they feed each other. So what do we do about all of this stuff? So let me give you a couple other things here. One of the things that I look for when a person's in fear is that they have massive mood swings. I don't know if you relate to that in yourself. You can be happy and laughing one minute, and then the next minute you're angry, depressed, etc. And that can happen. And then you can feel like crying for no apparent reason. And that's just because your emotional system is so maxed out that the slightest little thing can reduce you to a puddle. You're just that emotionally raw. Or other people, as they get maxed out, they shut everything else down. And now they don't care about anybody or anything. And it gets really scary for them because all of a sudden, they don't even care about their kids that much. They're just so consumed with their own fear. What do we do about this? So let me just very briefly give you a couple key tools. And over the next years, we will develop these tools gradually in more detail. We spend a lot of time at React on these tools. But the first thing that is important for a person with complex trauma is what we call technically distress tolerance. So distress is anxiety, fear, uncomfortable emotions. All of that, if you grew up in complex trauma, as soon as you had uncomfortable emotions, you said, I'm out of here. You didn't try to tolerate any of that. And so complex trauma, people have what we call distress intolerance. And so the key for people is to begin to learn, how do I tolerate or sit in, manage uncomfortable emotions? We all wish there was a magic wand that would just make them magically disappear. No such thing exists. So you have to begin to learn how to manage it. So there's two parts. What we call mindfulness and grounding. So part one is the grounding, and that's when my fear gets triggered more than normal. So I'm going along with the normal levels of fear, and then my kid comes home late from school, or they don't text me at 3:30 like they said they were going to. My fear is spiked. What happens in that moment is fear takes over my brain. And I go to worst case scenario, I become irrational. So step one is de-escalating. Getting that fear back down so I can think properly. And so there are tools for doing that. And a lot of that is available, and we've talked about it before. Some of it, people do breathing. Some people put their hands on their chair and their feet on the floor, and they say, today is June 1st. I am in Winnipeg. And they just go through grounding stuff. Here I am. And they engage their five senses. Part two is I have to deal in getting healthier emotionally outside of those crisis times. So what do I need to do to deal with that underlying fear in the rest of my life? And that's called mindfulness. And that's learning to meditate, learning to pray, learning to journal, developing a confidant, a counselor, a mentor that you can talk to, developing a spiritual connection. All of those things become part of getting healthier emotionally. It also means dealing with guilt when it comes up, dealing with problems as they come up, not procrastinating. All of that is very important. Next skill. Let's say that you have a lot of anxiety about coming into a social setting. And so let's say there was a time you wouldn't have been able to come to Finding Freedom because your anxiety was too great. So it wouldn't have done any good if somebody said, come on in, I'll be with you. You don't need to be afraid. You're a big girl. Put on your big girl panties. That would have just made you angry. But what do you do to get here? What do you do to feel anxiety but not give into it all the time? What do you do to push past it? And so that you need to plan. And so if you're thinking of going into a social setting, you go, okay, maybe I can come, and I'll come in just at the very start when everybody else is here. so that I can just sneak in and sit at the very back. And then as soon as it's done, I'll get out of here. That's week 1. You do that, you do it successfully, you grew. Next week you say, you know what? I'm going to come and I'm going to sit here, but I'm going to move up a chair. I'm going to let somebody sit behind me. Woo, that's getting anxious. And you have a safety plan. If it gets too much, I can go back to the previous week's chair, but I'm going to give it a try. And you give it a try. And so you have a plan. And then you build on that plan. And as you do that, you are dealing with anxiety. So part of anxiety is, I will probably for a long time have a certain level of anxiety in many situations. In the past, I would have numbed it, or I would just have avoided those situations. I can't do that any longer, because every time I give in to anxiety, I make it stronger. Somehow I got to keep pushing past it and just sit in the uncomfortable stuff. And then the final tool, fear gets you to believe lies. There's a song out right now that I love the words. It says, "Fear is a liar." And what that simply means is when you're in fear, what I ask people is if their fear gets triggered, how old do you feel right now? And they'll say, I feel 8 years old. I'll go, but you're not 8 years old. You are now an adult with different tools than that 8-year-old had. And when you were 8 years old, you felt all alone. Now you've got some people supporting and walking beside you. So don't believe the lie that you can't do it. Don't believe the lie that you're a failure. Don't believe the lie that the worst will happen, because it's always happened that way. So fear will generate a lie in your brain. Part of growing is identifying the lie that comes with that particular fear and then replacing it with the truth. That's tough, because that lie is based on emotions. The truth you're trying to put in there doesn't have any emotional support yet. It's just a cold fact. But what you say is, I choose to believe the truth, and I'm going to stop believing the lie. And as you do that, it gets easier and you grow. So that is an introduction to fear. Next week, what I'm going to talk about is people from complex trauma long for intimacy, but they're scared to death of intimacy.